Welcome to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Join us as we dive into the world of endurance sports, exploring everything from nutrition to training and how these elements shape your everyday life, both on and off the race course. Hosted by Coach Justin, certified run and triathlon coach and owner of Tabula Rasa Racing, along with Coach Katie, a registered dietitian specializing in sports nutrition and owner of Fuel to Run. We're here to share insights and real-world advice to help you thrive on your journey. Here at the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast is where your journey begins. Welcome, everyone, to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. I'm your host, Coach Justin. I'm here with Coach Katie, and this is episode 46. And today we're going to be talking about eating and training through the holidays. So some of our previous episodes, we focused on off-season training, which was episode 36. We also will be, we've released an episode, it was episode 44, on maintaining motivation. So we'll put those references in the show notes, but those are more of a broadly defined, like, time of year focused training. So it's like, what do you do like during winter months? You know, if you're in a summer, or typically a summer sport, to, fill in holes or whatever. This is more specific. We are focusing in, narrowing it down to our view of just the holidays. So we are rapidly approaching Thanksgiving and Christmas. At the time that we're recording this episode,
And actually maybe take some action because, it's only helpful if you can hear it in time for the holidays. Yes. And I do agree. I do think there's often a little bit of dysfunctional eating, or maybe some of our previous poor relationships with food get exacerbated a little bit this time of year. But I do think that with all of the stress and the parties and, other things kind of contributing to that, I think this time of year is tough in general. I know for a lot of people, but for myself, because of the time change and just it getting dark so early. I think actually sometimes this time of year for certain people is a time of year that people do kind of feel a little bit of that seasonal affective disorder, or maybe even get a little bit depressed. And so I think there's a lot going on around the holiday season, and there's obviously a lot of happiness and joy and fun and that kind of stuff too. But I think for a lot of people, it is a challenging time of year. So I kind of want to talk not so much about that because I'm not a mental health expert, but I do think bringing in some mindful eating, some thoughts around mindful eating and what is mindful eating, especially around the holidays, and then some talks, just some tips even on how to consider managing the holiday foods and eating around the holidays to kind of keep to your goals of, a lot of people this time of year, I think, are trying just not to gain a significant amount of weight over the holidays, or they are trying to continue training, or sometimes the training levels are reduced a little bit. So it is a challenge because you're not maybe exercising as much, but there's more opportunities for food. So it makes it a little bit more challenging, right?
yeah.
What are your thoughts? What do you tend to struggle with during the holidays?
The whole nesting mentality, I think, is pretty common. One of my questions that I would have for you, that I hope that maybe we can kind of bring up, is what are the effects of cold weather on the body's caloric needs? Does persistent cold weather actually cause the body to work harder and harder and harder, so actually your caloric needs would increase? Or is it just that we just spend more time indoors, and maybe it's a little bit more of just your access to food is increased, and therefore, you might have a higher proclivity to eat more?
Yeah, I think it's
You got the social gathering part of it as
right.
well. So
I don't think, unless you're out in the cold working all day, or when we're running in it and exercising in it, yeah, a little bit, maybe our energy expenditure goes up a little bit with the cold because we're working a little bit harder to keep ourselves warm, but it's not significant to the point where it's going to be able to offset some of the eating that might occur. It's unless you are spending a significant amount of time outside, or you decided you wanted to reduce your heating bill and now you're keeping your house at like 55. So you're cold, you're allowing yourself to be uncomfortable or something. Like, yeah, maybe your energy. And I'm not exactly saying that's a good strategy because, I mean, you can if you want. I kind of like things a little bit cooler, but then I tend to wear, sweatshirts and stuff. So it probably defeats the purpose. I'm not actually that uncomfortable. I just like being cozy, so I like wearing sweatshirts and having, like, blankets and stuff, but that's not gonna make a big difference. It's probably I think it is just more the access to food. There's a lot, I think just being inside more, maybe you're not outside doing things, so I know, when I'm inside more, there's food, so maybe I'm more bored. In the summer, we're always outside running around. We have, like, a donkey, we're always taking him for walks and doing all sorts of stuff to be outside. We'd much rather be outside. And then when it's cold out, we tend to be inside a lot more, and then I think the access to the food is definitely more because it's a little bit of boredom too. You're just kinda, like,
Yeah.
sitting around and you're like, "Oh, I'm bored. I wanna eat." And I mean, I'm not immune to that. Even as a dietitian, I think people think, "Oh, you're eating healthy all the time. You got this figured out." Well, I'm not immune to, like, those urges to eat from boredom or other, like, things people bringing cookies or treats and things that might be available, and I do also this time of year, I get into a baking mood myself. I don't know if you're a baker, but I like to bake, and it doesn't happen over the summer because it's too hot to put the oven on, and I'm so busy with other stuff and being outside and so actually over the summer, I usually struggle. That's when I really have to make sure I'm eating enough. And in the winter, that's not the case. I'm usually doing just fine with that. And because I do like baking and I get in this mood to do like pumpkin muffins or I'm like, "Ooh, I wanna make cinnamon rolls and stuff like that, treats that I don't make a lot otherwise, but I just kind of get into these moods, and I think that's normal. Cookies, over the holidays as well, just making different kinds of cookies, especially with my son, who's celiac disease, so we have to make gluten-free stuff, so sometimes it's kinda, okay, I want him to be included, so we're making stuff that he can have, but that makes it harder too, because then I have baked goods available, It's like things I don't normally have a lot of, and then I have all these different muffins or things that I've made, and so I try not to do that a whole bunch. How do I manage it? Like, maybe, I'm happy to share that, but I wanna say that because I don't want people to think that what I'm gonna say today is all, "Oh, okay, don't bake, don't enjoy the holidays, don't eat the food." Just be, like, very rigid or something, and that's not at all what I wanna say. I think it's just more about how to find that balance and some tips for making sure you're also taking care of yourself and eating healthy over the holidays, but how do you balance some of those treats and baked goods and holiday, food and not feel deprived either? Because that's not the goal. I think it's just about how to kind of still enjoy it, but not let that food kind of get out of those foods kind of become something that kind of gets out of control where you're just eating way too much, gaining a ton of weight over the holidays, and then having to be like, "Oh, no, now I've gained more than 10 pounds, and you have to lose this all before I start training for my marathon," and then you're kind of put yourself into a situation where, it's just a lot more work to try to lose that weight, and there is a lot of research out there on gaining and losing and sort of that, what do they call it, where it's, like, up and down in weight,
Yeah, the yo-yo.
just yo-yoing, in weight, and there's so much that's really just not that good for us. So we do wanna make sure we're not gaining too much weight, but I also think the expectation maybe also shouldn't be to not gain any weight at all. Maybe there's some wiggle room there perhaps. So around this time of year, I always tend to gain at least maybe around 5 pounds, and then I always lose it, over the course of the training as I kinda get into the new year. So that might be okay. I'm not gonna be upset with myself if I get on the scale and it's a little bit up, as long as it's not, going every day, it's up and up and up, and I'm not keeping an eye on it, but yeah. I don't know, that kind of went off on a tangent there a little bit. We could talk a little bit more about the weight, but yeah. Any other thoughts, anything you struggle with that?
Well, you like to make baked goods. Well, I like to eat baked goods. So we'll it's a great partnership there. So I'm not much of a baker, but I'm definitely an eater. So there's
Yeah.
that.
I think I'm a dietitian, but I'm also kind of like a foodie. Like, I do enjoy food. I do appreciate baked goods and food and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's take this one direction here is that let's focus on, let's say Thanksgiving is coming and Christmas is coming. How do you recommend an athlete approach these two particular days in terms of their eating? What are some methods that they can employ to not restrict their eating but have it under control?
Right. So I think the thing to think about with Thanksgiving, the reason I don't generally worry too much about Thanksgiving is because it's just one day. It should be just that one day. And so if you just overeat on this one day of Thanksgiving over the course of like, let's say a week, it really won't make that big of a difference. Like, yes, you could probably overeat by several hundred calories, but our body does generally have a pretty good way of managing intake. And you might find that days after Thanksgiving, you're just not as hungry. And so, generally, if you can just stick to this one day and not worry about it, like that's probably my bit of advice for Thanksgiving. I think people get into trouble when now they've have all these leftovers and one day of Thanksgiving food becomes 5 days of Thanksgiving food.
Yeah.
And that doesn't apply to everything. Obviously, if you have a bunch of turkey, like that's great because that's a really lean meat as long as it's just a regular roasted turkey. You could make some healthy meals out of that if there's leftover turkey, if there's leftover vegetables of some sort. But I think people get into trouble when there's like a ton of stuffing or sweet potato casserole, which is one of my favorites, but it's not, it's more of like a dessert than it is an actual food
Yeah.
item that should be eaten in excess. It's so certain things that are the more calorie dense parts of Thanksgiving, if you're done eating those foods and kind of having the pie for breakfast, for 5, 6 days in a row after Thanksgiving because you made way too much. That's where I think people tend to get into trouble with Thanksgiving is more the eating of the foods for several days afterwards. So I tend to tell people, especially that I work with in the nutrition space, whether it's athletes or otherwise, that don't don't worry too much about Thanksgiving, but I'll give you some tips anyways if you're kind of wanting to manage Thanksgiving. And I've done some interesting experiments myself, like I've told you before, using continuous glucose monitors. So I've done some really interesting things just trying to see if I could even manage my blood sugar spikes a little bit. And so this is one year I did the turkey trot, but I didn't like not eat. I still ate breakfast before. I think I had oatmeal. I ate, fueled like I normally would because I did the turkey trot and then I added a warm up and a cool down. It ended up being like 10 miles or something. So I added a little bit to it and I actually came home and I think I did some like deadlifts too. So I added a little bit of strength training and then I ate like a really high protein meal after, like a protein shake or something with like, or Greek yogurt, something really high protein. And then we went over to Thanksgiving and that's when all the food happens. So my first tip is if you go into Thanksgiving like not eating at all, like a lot of people do, they're kind of like, I'm just gonna not eat at all. I'm gonna save
Yeah.
all my calories for Thanksgiving. I think that actually backfires a little bit. But if you can focus on, especially if you're gonna do something active like a turkey trot, like definitely fuel like you normally would before that activity. And then maybe afterwards focus on some high protein. So you can get that protein in, you kind of fill up a little bit, and that way you're not going into Thanksgiving completely starving. Because that I think is when people tend to way overdo it. And it's fun to enjoy the food, but when you're so sick afterwards that you feel just awful, like that's not great either. So I just don't recommend like going into it totally fasted generally because I think that backfires. You're so hungry by the time to eat. You just the tendency to overeat a ton of the high carb sort of energy dense foods is going to be higher. You're probably going to end up eating way more than you would otherwise in terms of calories. So going into it, I always bring a vegetable tray. That's the thing I like to bring if I'm going somewhere. I've even make it fun. I made it like a turkey. I've even decorated it so it looks like a turkey. And then I have different dips and maybe sometimes like cheese or something. And what I do before we eat is I just like eat a lot. I just do the vegetable tray, maybe like if there's a little bit of cheese or something, just some veggies, protein, just kind of munching on that stuff. And then when we get to the meal, generally then I'm not totally ravenous. I'm excited to eat it. I am ready and I'm still hungry, but I'm not like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna just shove all this down my throat. That way I can, okay, really think about what I want to. Like the other tip I would say is if you don't like stuffing, like don't eat it. Just look at what's available. What are you having and pick the foods that you really, really want to have and like leave the rest. It's okay if you don't have it, if you don't like it. I know some people feel guilty because so and so, like Aunt Martha made the stuffing or the whatever it is, and you feel like you have to eat
Yeah.
it. Fine, take a little bite of it if you feel like you have to, but really focus on the foods that you enjoy the most. Get a plate, and at this point, this is kind of where I'm like, just eat, till you're comfortable. Enjoy it. Try to be mindful, be present, eat it, enjoy the taste. Like try to not stuff it in your face. And I think if you've had the opportunity to eat a little bit before and maybe you've been snacking on some veggies, now you've sort of sequenced some other things beforehand, so you're not going to be so hungry that you just, eat, and then you're like, "Oh my gosh, I finished this plate of food and I don't even know I don't even taste it because I was so hungry. I didn't even really pay any attention to what it tasted like." So and then yeah, if you wanna go back for a second, sure. Like, if you feel like you still want some more, have some more, have that piece of pie. If you live somewhere where that you're able to do this, maybe go for, like, a stroll, a walk, nothing vigorous, just a nice walk after you eat. That's a great way to sort of help get some of that carbs carbs from all that mashed potatoes, sweet potatoes, stuffing, pie, is some of that right away, because, that's one thing I noticed using the CGM that really helped me was going for a little walk afterwards. But you don't have to do that. It's just a nice little way, and it sometimes helps you digest and feel good after if the weather's nice. But I just noticed by sequencing the sort of the protein meal and then all the veggies, like when I did have my continuous glucose monitor and having done the exercise prior, I didn't really have a huge response like I was expecting. And I remember having like a pretty large plate of all of the foods that I love, like the sweet potato casserole and the obviously the turkey. I think I even tried eating the turkey. I sequenced even the turkey first. I ate the turkey first and then all the other stuff. So that's a little tip too. There's actually research on meal sequencing, and just sequencing some protein and veggies first prior to the carb can actually be a really great way of balancing out that energy, that glucose response that, that's oftentimes why we sometimes feel so terrible after, is because we have this huge spike in glucose and then it maybe drops or it's just staying up there and you're just like, oh, I feel terrible. So if you can find ways to kind of mitigate that a little bit, and we tend to eat a bit less when we have the protein first. So when we can sequence that, and if you remember, I think I mentioned how protein is such a good satiety macronutrient for satiety and just helping us feel full. So, and there actually is research. It sounds sometimes some of the things I feel like kind of sound like woo woo, but there's actually, and I could even pull some of that for this episode I might have to write that down, but just kind of to have that linked so people can see it. It's just interesting. So that's how I mean, if you wanted to sort of strategize your Thanksgiving in a way to um still be able to eat the foods, but maybe really not have the feeling of not feeling so good afterwards, or just managing it a little bit better so you can get through the day and not and not maybe not really gain weight, not that you're going to gain a ton in just one day, but that's how I would go about that specific day, or something to think about with that day. But like I said, if you're like, I'm not going to do that, seems like a lot of thinking about it, and I'm not going to make a vegetable tray that looks like a turkey. That's fine. Just take that one day and try not to go have pie for several days afterwards. I mean, you can, but that tends to be where people get into trouble. Usually if I have leftover pie, I'm strategic about when I eat it. It might be like after my workout or something like that. You know what I mean? So I'm like having it, using it kind of more as a fuel source, but not usually for breakfast. It's not the best thing to do because it's pretty high in carb. But that's what, Thanksgiving's, I think, a pretty easy one to manage. And I definitely recommend signing up for like a turkey trot or something so you can get some activity in. Do you have any thoughts on Thanksgiving?
One of the things that I discovered is, I mean, at my family events, there's always this exchange of leftovers. So everything is
Yeah.
getting boxed up, and they're just like, "Oh, do you want some of this? And do you want some of that?" And sometimes there's this pressure to say, yeah, I'll take some, because if you tell them no, you don't want them to think, oh, I just didn't like it and I think it was bad. But one thing that I've discovered is that I've just gotten into the habit of saying, the least amount that I bring home sets me up for a situation where, Thanksgiving becomes a multi-day event. I'm
Mhm.
more likely to try and give the food that I bring away, but not take other food home. So
That's
that's one of the
yeah,
things
I think that's
that I
just
found that
say,
kind of
"No, I
helped
don't want"
me. Yeah,
or
it's
take
just like,
some of it, but maybe not
yeah, just say,
enough.
I appreciate the offer, but
Yeah.
thanks. I don't want Thanksgiving to turn into a multi-day event. If you kind of explain to them your rationale and your reasoning for saying no, then chances are they're less likely to, I guess, kind of get offended. But chances are they may not be offended anyway, and it's just you think that they're offended.
Right. I mean, if you say, like, "This food was great," like, "Wow, Aunt Martha, caffeine was wonderful, like, it's so good." I think we're more worried about what people are gonna think, too sometimes, and they're not really thinking about it. Maybe they're like, "Oh, good, more for us." Maybe they're like, "Oh, good, more for myself." I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. But, or maybe be like, "Yeah, can I have some of the turkey?"
What about the rationale for the time of day that the Thanksgiving takes place? If you have control over when the Thanksgiving meal takes place, trying to schedule it earlier in the day,
Yeah.
let's say like 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, is probably a lot better than having Thanksgiving at like 4 or 5.
Yeah, I would say if you could have it scheduled earlier by 3 p.m. is much better. If you're kind of pushing it later in the day, then that especially if you're gonna, like, try to, like, not eat all day and then eat at 5, like, your chances of really overdoing it are much higher. But in terms of, like, the way we process food and our kind of aligns with our circadian rhythm, especially this time of year when it's getting dark by 5, if you're eating at 5 and it's getting dark, you're sort of misaligning that huge meal with when we would actually be able to tolerate it better, which would probably be more midday is when our body would just be more primed to be able to kind of tolerate that larger amount of food and be able to work through it, digest it, get to, get through it by the time we get to bed. And not and it, even with going back to some of that research on glucose, when we have meals like higher carb meals like that midday versus later in the day, our responses are going to be much better because our body is just much more sensitive to the insulin and the incoming glucose is able to be utilized a little bit better than later in the day when we're just having a little harder time processing all that food. So definitely trying to have it earlier is my suggestion. If you have any say in that or you're the one hosting, maybe, that's plus then it gives you time to kind of eat and then lounge around and watch football or take that walk, whatever you want to do the rest of the day and socialize. So that's another thing to think about too.
I think that, and another piece that I would suggest would be, if you are, I don't want to say if you're dieting, but that's probably the best word to use. If you're dieting, there might be some rationale behind suspending your diet for that particular day. Because
Mhm.
what I found is, like, if I'm going into a holiday meal and I'm, really paying attention as to what I'm eating, or I'm quote unquote dieting, then I'm more likely to say, no, I can't have that. And I think the word can't really plants a seed in your mind to where it almost feels like you're depriving yourself from that particular food. And I know for me, once I start this route of deprivation, then it consumes me, because then that's all I think about. So it's like, if you tell a toddler, don't touch that, what's the thing that they're going to do? They're going to go touch it. You're depriving them from that, and that's what they focus on. I know that for me, that tends to be kind of like how my brain works. So if I say, I'm not going to have any macaroni and cheese today, because that is one of my, like, all-time favorites, then macaroni and cheese is the only thing that I'm going to think about. And so I found that if I say, okay, I've been fairly good with my diet up until now, one day is not going to make or break anything. So I'm going to enjoy this day. I'm going to have the mac and cheese, and I'm going to have the cookie that I want, or, I'm going to have turkey and ham. Then do that. But then when the next day rolls around, then you're like, okay, I had my fun. I'm back at it. I'm refocused, and don't think about it. Don't go back and say, this was a failure, because that's what I would do. Is like I would go back and say, oh, I completely failed.
Yeah, I think that makes a good point. I just wanna mention, like, don't then the next day be like, "Okay, I'm gonna punish myself." I have to purge,
Yeah. Yep.
so to speak, this meal that I just had that was too big, and I'm gonna go like, do some sort of, like, epic thing. It's fine if you're training and you're doing something, but don't then, quote, unquote, "purge," and that is a form of purging. I think people don't understand exercise is great and I love training, but if you're ever finding that you are thinking about exercise as a means to get rid of calories or purge something that you've done like the day before, like, okay, I'm gonna run extra long so that I can make up for overeating the day prior, that is a big red flag for me when I'm working with people because that to me tells me there is a disordered eating. Potential disordered eating and some sort of relationship with food that isn't good and it's bleeding over into our exercise.
Yeah.
We should be using the training as the benefit to training is that yes, we maybe have a little bit more wiggle room to eat certain things. We have a little more of a calorie budget, and that is a nice benefit, but you shouldn't be thinking, I'm going to be doing this exercise so I can eat. Like the turkey trot and all that, like that but I'm still eating, I don't know, I'm like, it's not like I'm thinking, "Oh, I'm gonna have these calories." Never in my mind is I'm like, I'm trying to burn calories to be able to eat more later. It's just kinda like, I know I'm gonna feel better if I do this, and it's kind of part of my training plan anyway, but I'm never thinking to myself, "Oh, like, how many calories am I burning?" And I'm not actually ever counting my calories that I'm eating on Thanksgiving, ever. I don't think I've ever, like, recorded or counted or even had any idea how many calories I'm eating, and if that's something you're doing on a day like Thanksgiving, that's a holiday, like, I think that's kind of a red flag, especially and I mean, I think we think of purging and we think of people who binge and then purge and it's actually like they're they're getting it out, but exercise is another form of purging, and so if that's something you're struggling with or in this particular day or in general on many days of the year, it's something I think to reach out and get some help for because that is not healthy. So if you overeat on Thanksgiving, I really encourage you to just start the next day fresh and it's not a big deal. It's not going to make or break your training plan or your diet or anything like that.
All right. So yeah, Thanksgiving tends to be just that singular day. Rarely do we find spillover for Thanksgiving. However, Christmas, though, I think
Sure.
can be different. There's already a built-in spillover for Christmas, and that's Christmas Eve, right? So now
Right.
Christmas is not just a singular day activity. You have the day before Christmas, which is Christmas Eve. If you're listening to this in Europe or in the UK, you have Boxing Day, which is typically the day after Christmas, which would be December 26th. So now you've got the span of 3 days that surrounds this holiday.
Or
So
I even wondered,
Christmas
like,
is a little bit
Hanukkah or
different.
something, like, I don't celebrate Hanukkah, but it's like, isn't that, like, 8
That's
days? Like,
seven.
there's, like,
That's
this
like 7 or 8 days.
7 or 8
Yeah.
days. It's, like, span of several days, and I don't know if there's, like, celebrations happening every single day, but, I'm even thinking there, it's several days long, and I mean, I'm guessing that people kind of have special foods that they have throughout that process too. So maybe, so there's other holidays besides Christmas that are happening that may be several days of celebration. So that's where people tend to get into a little more trouble, right? Because they're not trouble, but that's where it gets navigating that is a little bit more challenging. So
So what can we do to set ourselves up for success when we have multiple days that we have to account for? Because the advice that we gave for Thanksgiving is like treat it as just the one day. You've got the one day. Be cognizant of I'm going to enjoy myself. I'm going to have fun. I'm going to enjoy the foods that I like. I'm going to eat what I like. And then the next day, I'm back on track. However, when you have multiple days, how can we manage that? Do we say, let's say Christmas Eve, we're a little bit more cognizant of what we eat, and then we allow Christmas Day to kind of be, release the reins a little bit, and then get back on track. So now we've kind of cut the 3 days down to like 2 days, but we were really in sort of control for Christmas Eve and then kind of release that control on Christmas Day. How do you manage multiple days like this without it gaining momentum?
The other thing too is there's oftentimes Christmas parties and other things too, so
Yeah.
it it is truly, like, maybe not just those 2 days, but, yeah, I kind of think, Christmas Eve, it's usually just the evening in my experience. I don't know how other people everybody's traditions are a little bit different, but from my experience, it's usually just, like, everybody gets together and there's, like, a meal on Christmas Eve, and then there's, like, Christmas Day, and usually that day is, like, breakfast is usually something kind of like cinnamon rolls or, it's not, or something kind of splurgy. And then there's usually one other meal that day that is like kind of similar to Thanksgiving. So it is a little bit more, I think, depending on your tradition, like if you can make Christmas Eve a little bit more of a balanced meal. So let's say like you do some kind of meat, like a steak or some kind of roast and have some veggies and then have some starch, like maybe actually kind of thinking about it in terms of like still having some of those holiday favorites, but you're also planning in some roasted veggies, and some kind of leaner meat and balancing your plate accordingly. So maybe whatever the starch is might be a little bit of a splurge, whether it's something like mac and cheese or something, but you're still being mindful, right? You're thinking of it, okay, I'm going to balance my plate like this. And then I think then you're going to be okay. And then maybe if there's a dessert, just have one. I mean, I don't usually experience that there's a lot of desserts and things generally on Christmas Eve. Maybe thinking about how you're planning your plate and almost using that plate method of like, okay, if you can have like a quarter plate protein, a good portion of veggies, and then some of that starch that you really enjoy, because usually the starchy food piece and the desserts that tend to get us. And the other thing too is I think this kind of applies for all of the Christmas parties and Christmas is and usually it's alcoholic beverages people are consuming, and there's a lot of like cocktails that are sweet, special pomegranate cocktails that are red, you know what I mean, for like
Yeah.
Christmases, those specialty ones. And they do add a lot of empty calories. Personally, I'm kind of leaned away from drinking very much because I just don't feel that good. But I would just encourage people to be mindful also about what they're drinking at the parties and at Christmas and maybe trying to stay away from those sugary cocktails or okay, I'm going to have one cocktail if somebody's making that, and then I'm gonna stick with, like, seltzer water and a little bit of or, like, a seltzer-based drink, like White Claw or something like that, that's a little bit lower in calories, and just making sure you're sticking with some fluids, like water as well in between, so you're not totally dehydrating yourself, but I think really watching those added, like, especially sugary drinks during the holidays, because that can kinda get people, I think, quite a bit too, not as much the food is one, but that's probably a big one. And then I think Christmas, like, again, it's probably a lot like Thanksgiving, the actual day of Christmas. Try to just enjoy it. No, try not it's okay, it's just one day, but if you but if it's like I think the other problem people have is for me, this is the baking, right? The cookies and sometimes the excessive amounts of cookies. My mother-in-law and I love her dearly, and she loves to make cookies, but she and her sister made, like, dozens and dozens of different kinds of Christmas cookies, and then they would distribute them to all sorts of people, and they would always give us this huge tray of Christmas cookies. And until recently, because recently I'm like, we can't have these because Theo can't have them, and we're not gonna have all these cookies in our house. And then, like, that kinda sucks for Theo who can't have them because of his celiac disease. So it's kind of been almost a blessing in a way because she can give them to my husband a few to take to work, but I don't get really have that temptation as much. But I still like to, with my son, make cookies. So I asked him this year, like, okay, we can make 2 types of Christmas cookies. Like, which types would you like to make? I'm not going to make 8 different kinds of Christmas cookies for like the 3 of us, but I'll make 2 different types, maybe, and it's a whole experience and we'll decorate them and but then I have cookies available. And I think then it's just that I think that's the hard part for people is when they have like whether it's a whole tin of cookies someone gave you or just a couple kinds you make and they're sitting there and they're kind of calling your name like, "Hey,
Yeah.
the cookies are over here." You know what I mean? I think that's a challenge, and I don't deny myself cookies. I usually try to stick to maybe 2 or so cookies a day to enjoy them maybe after I'm done with one of my runs. So I'm kind of like, okay, like I kind of need the carbs right now. This is when my body's, I don't always do that. I sometimes eat them at the wrong time, but I do like the wrong time. But I do, try to kind of think of, okay, how am I going to enjoy this? Or if I'm having like a lunch, like, during my work day, I'll have like a big salad or something kind of really healthy. And then I'll have like the cookie will be my carb. So I kind of think about, okay, how can I balance this baked goods a little bit more into my day so I can still enjoy them, but they're not sitting there calling my name and I'm like denying myself, because generally what happens then is that 8 o'clock at night, when you've told yourself you can't have any cookies, the cookies win, right?
Yeah,
And then you have
they win.
6 cookies, right? I mean, I think most people listening will be like, yeah, absolutely. Enjoy it. Like be mindful about it. Sit down. This is where the mindful strategies come in, but when we're mindful eating is really about being present and not distracted while we're eating. I think people have heard the concept of mindfulness, but this is kind of around food. So trying to, and I'm guilty, I'm so guilty of this, like having my phone out, looking at emails, working while I'm eating. I can't say I don't do that, but I think around this time of year, especially when it comes to those treats and those little added things, like trying to actually be like, okay, I'm gonna have this cookie, but I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna enjoy it. I'm gonna eat it slowly, kind of enjoy it, savor it. And then I think you might find if you're doing that, instead of being distracted on your phone or watching TV or trying to do work while you're eating, you might find it's actually quite satisfying. And you're like, I really just don't need any more cookies. That was great. I had one cookie and I am totally satisfied with that. And when you're kind of having cravings, even just taking a moment to ask yourself, like, I haven't like, wow, those cookies are calling for, seem to be calling my name. I know they're there and I really want one. And just being like, am I hungry or am I stressed? Or like what is the like what's going on? Why do I need this cookie so bad right now? And if it's
Yeah.
hunger, maybe try to have like okay, I'm gonna have the cookie, but I'm gonna have like a balance, like some protein snack before. And then I'm gonna have the cookie so I can balance it out a little bit, or because I actually think I'm hungry, or if it's like I'm really stressed, like okay, maybe find some way to deal with that isn't food, like go for a little walk or do something that helps bring the stress down a little bit. And then if you're still feeling as though you need the cookie, sure, have it, but just be really present and try to be mindful while you're eating it. So just there's quite a few, like if you Google mindful eating, and I can always tag a book recommendation to this, link it in there in the show notes. But there's a lot about mindful eating out there. So if you're like, wow, that's really interesting, I want to dig into this more, because this isn't an entire blog or podcast on mindful eating, but I do think it really helps in the holiday season to think about this mindfulness. I think also, I think going back to like what I was talking about Thanksgiving is don't skip a bunch of meals, even on Christmas Eve. Don't wait all day to eat Christmas dinner or Christmas Eve dinner. Try to keep eating like you normally would. Just maybe try to have, maybe those meals are you're extra diligent to make sure they're nice and healthy. So when you do go into Christmas, you can enjoy it and not really worry that it's going to really throw you off. The other thing, for those people who do go to Christmas parties, I mean, just kind of thinking too about, what you're bringing. If you can bring a healthy dish, if it's like a potluck, that's a great strategy. And also don't stand right next to the food as you're socializing. So try to socialize a little bit away from the food. But whenever there's a lot of options, maybe taking a minute to like look at what's available and be like, okay, I really want to try this and this, instead of going through and picking a little bit of everything. Sometimes I like have stuff on my plate and I'm like, I don't actually really like this. I don't feel like pressure to eat things if they don't taste good to you either. Just throw it away. It's okay. I have to say guiltily, like going back to my mother-in-law's cookie thing, I would actually throw some of those cookies away. I didn't eat all of them.
That's hard to do.
It's hard to do, but I did it.
Yeah.
Every time I'd eat a cookie, I'd be like, I'm throwing this, because she literally gave us like enough cookies for 5 people for like a month. Yeah, it was a lot of cookies. And I'm like, okay, I don't really like this one that much. And I know, I kind of wonder what my husband thought. Like if he thought I was just eating all those cookies, or if he figured out he's never said anything to me. But they were always the ones I'm like, I don't really think either of us really like this kind. I'm just going to throw it away. And I would eat one, I would take one and then because it was just too many. But you don't want to I didn't want to be like, I don't want all your
Yeah.
cookies. Like, because at the time I didn't have an excuse, like gluten-free. So I know I think people hearing that really be like, "Oh, you're a terrible person," but at the same time, like, it's maybe not that good for us. If somebody gives us a ton of cookies, like, it's okay, especially if you don't like them. Say
Yeah.
thank you, be appreciative, and nobody's gonna know like, I'm saying I'm spilling the beans now, but her cookies were great. It's just that the amount was too much, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So and we sometimes would give them away to other people, but there's, like, a plentiful amount of cookies, generally going around that time of years. Uh, I know. People are probably listening and they're like, "Yours?"
No, I would.
"Oh my
Yeah,
gosh, I
I
can't believe
completely
you did
agree.
that." She
So
didn't know.
one of the things that you said, kind of, I just made a short little note here about it, is the feeling of being overwhelmed. And I
Yep.
think that I know that that's something that I struggle with, is when there is a large menu of items to select from, whether it be at Christmas or Thanksgiving. I know that that kind of sets me up for failure because I feel overwhelmed, and it's just like, oh, that looks good, and that looks good, and that looks good, and that looks good. And so what I found is that what I would actually prefer is just to have a smaller menu. If we're going to say we're going to have two pies and that's it. There's not going to be like five different kinds of pie to pick from, because I want a slice of each one.
I
And
know,
then
right? They're all good.
I'm gonna put three slices on my plate, and I'm gonna get sick because I'm a gastric bypass patient and can't deal with sugar. But I never learned my lesson, even after over 10 years of being post-op. I still will go for it. It's ridiculous. And so then you say, all right, we're gonna have, one to two kinds of protein, and we're gonna have two carbohydrate, and we're gonna have three kinds of vegetables. And that's
Mhm.
and that's the menu. So then you don't have the mashed potatoes, you don't have the macaroni and cheese, you don't have the green bean casserole, and you don't have the sweet potato casserole. If those four items, you say, let's just pick two of those things to pick, and that's going to be our carb. I think that that would set me up for a lot better, for more success, to not feel so overwhelmed and not run the risk of, okay, I'm going to create one plate and then I'm going to come back for seconds and have a different selection, because now, I've now tried almost a little bit of everything, which is bad for me. So
Yeah,
that's
that's
one
tough.
of the
Yeah, I
things
agree
that
with you. That I would agree, like, trying to limit. I think taking a moment before you dive into, if that's the case and you're like, "Oh, there's no way I'm gonna be able to, like, only because just my family, they love food." Like, some people from the Midwest, I don't know why. I don't know, I just met enough people that are from the Midwest, and it seems like food is a big piece for them, and lots of food, and so if that's the case and nobody's gonna be like, "No, we're not limiting it, we're gonna have everything." And to take a moment to really think about what you want the most. But for me, it's like I don't really love the green bean casserole, so I'm gonna be, like, skipping that one. And then my husband's family makes this frog eye casserole. I don't know, does not really made out of frog eyes. It's just some kinda, like, weird. I can't even explain. It has, like, noodles in it, and it's kinda sweet. It's strange. I don't know. I didn't have it growing up, so I'm like, definitely not. You know what I mean? I'm not doing that one. That's like, okay, what are the things I really want? And I'm like, well, and what are the things I don't get that often, most of the year. So I'm trying to, and most of the things I think at Thanksgiving, you're probably not eating a whole lot all the time, but that's how I do. Just kind of take a moment to kind of see what's available and really pick those things I really, really want, and then try to like leave the rest. And obviously, there's going to be things I don't love. I don't even really like stuffing that much. So I'm like,
me neither.
it doesn't appeal to me, so that one's off the table. So it's gonna probably be, like, the 2 types of it's probably gonna be the mashed potatoes and the sweet potatoes, and that's probably the majority, and, for my carb, and then it's like, I love the gravy and I love the turkey, so I'm gonna have a big, big old serving of that, and then I'm gonna be pretty full, some vegetables of some sort. Usually taking a moment to survey what's available and really think about, okay, well, I'm gonna have that and this. And that's what I'm gonna have instead of like, I think the tendency for people is to like grab the plate and just dig in,
Yeah.
And if there's something you don't like, don't have leave it on the plate. I know you don't want to make people feel bad, but it's okay. Most people aren't paying attention to what's on your plate usually. So it's okay to like leave it and throw it away. So don't feel pressure.
The second thing that I wanted to bring up to you is, I admit I experimented with this one Thanksgiving that I was hosting, and I when to see the look on my family's face, and when I was telling them how I was making these items, you could literally see the disappointment in their eyes. So
Oh, no.
I was like, oh, okay. What I experimented with is that, okay, if we want mashed potatoes, we're gonna have mashed potatoes. However, the mashed potatoes are a mix of potato and cauliflower. So I've reduced the carbohydrate in the mashed potatoes by having some filler of cauliflower. For the macaroni and cheese, instead of making it with enriched like white noodles, I made them with whole wheat noodles. And
Right.
literally, I think my kids kind of had a revolution, and they're just like, "Dad, never, never, ever, ever do this again. We want the enriched white noodles. Please don't make mac and cheese with wheat noodles." What are you take on this kind of
Yeah.
like ingredient substitution when we can find alternative ways to make some of our favorite dishes that might be quote unquote healthier?
Yeah, that's a good point. So sometimes I've done that and I don't tell people till, like, after.
I
So
should
I'm
not have
like,
told anybody.
I made this sweet potato casserole one time, healthier version, and I made it with, like, a little bit of orange juice. It didn't have as much sugar, and I didn't tell anyone, and everyone's like, "Oh, the sweet potato casserole is really good," and then I was like, "Yeah," I mean, after the fact, I was like, "Yeah, I made it healthier, so it's less sugar, and it's, like, the topping is healthier," you know what I mean? And I love doing that. Usually if I'm experimenting, I might try it before, make sure it tastes good, but yeah, I don't if it's like you're totally doing something oddball, like trying to make like a lower carb version, it's gonna be obvious it's not the real thing. I mean, people are gonna figure it out. But if it's like something like the cauliflower, I feel like many people maybe wouldn't even be able to tell. I would wait, as long as you've got the right portions of each and, you still add a little bit of butter and stuff, I think people might not be able to tell. It's just interesting to see if people notice. So, if you're gonna do it, don't go totally like where it's obvious, but see, sometimes people will actually I think people liked my sweet potato because it actually tasted like sweet potatoes. It wasn't so sugary. It was just like basically sugar and you couldn't even taste the potato. It was like, and then that little bit of orange just made the flavor pop. You know what I mean? So sometimes I've noticed some of the recipes are just overkill. There's way too much sugar in them, anyways, way too much butter. You could probably use half the amount, anyways, and it would taste almost better. So even experimenting with just some swap out. So, like, maybe try adding, like, 3 if it calls for a cup of sugar, 3/4 of a cup if you're scared to use half the sugar amount. If it's a baked good, like a sweet bread or something like a pumpkin bread or banana bread, try, if it calls for, like, 1 cup of oil, try using 1/2 a cup of oil and half a cup of applesauce or something like that, and you would be surprised it's actually, like, tastes just the same. Don't go I think it's when people go overkill and they use the entire cup of applesauce and absolutely no oil because the mouthfeel is a little bit different, but sometimes just making a few little swap outs, like, changes, you'd be surprised that either it tastes just the same or better, so I think those little things are worth trying, and it does make the meal it's kind of helping everyone out a little bit in a way, just making it a slight bit healthier but still getting that good taste, and I think that's kind of the fun for me. That's one of the things I love doing with baking and cooking is just trying to find ways to make it just a touch healthier, and taste just as good or better. It's something that is like, if you have the skill to do that, go ahead, and what's fun is trying to see if anyone notices, and it's always great when they say, "This is even better than the original version," and then you can be like, "Yeah, it's healthier."
Yeah. But the key takeaway is don't tell them
Don't tell them till
until later.
till they say
Yeah.
something or you
Yeah.
later and just sort of see, it's kind of fun.
The next thing that I kind of wanted to bring up is in our society, it's common to have multiple families that you have to
Right.
that you feel like you have to visit within a single 24-hour time frame. And with the prevalence of divorced parents, it's common to see, it's like, oh, I got to go to my mom's house in the afternoon, and I'm going to my dad's house in the evening. As athletes, or as just anybody in particular, what are some ideas that you would have to manage the need to go to multiple meals within a day or multiple families across the span of like maybe 2 days? How do you manage that?
Yeah, I think then you kind of do maybe would wanna be a little bit more mindful, like, if you are eating in the same day, like, going to 2 different families, you're doing one earlier in the day and then later.
Yeah.
I think that it's really important to kinda choose, "Okay, no, I'm gonna probably be eating a little bit later, so I'm gonna be a little bit more mindful of my plate. I'm still gonna get some things on the plate that I like, but I'm not gonna, like, overdo do it because you're gonna eat maybe later too." So, just being able to manage the portions a little bit more at each meal, and not to say you're not gonna have you still might indulge in what you enjoy and what you want, but you might not take a heaping portion. I would advise maybe a smaller portion of those foods and, you know, balance out with the veggies like I've talked about, and then trying to do that later too. So, because you're kind of splitting that bigger meal into 2. If it's multiple days, I do think that's hard. I think that is where you might have to choose, like, one day where you are gonna splurge a little more, and then if you're traveling and you're doing, like, a second Thanksgiving somewhere, like, on a different day to kinda choose which one you wanna really indulge in and which you're gonna kinda be a little bit more mindful of, because that is, I think, where the trouble lies is when it becomes a multi-day event, right? For athletes, it's like I think the problem we run into is some athletes I work with, it's like maybe they've done their Ironman or whatever it is, and they've been doing all this volume and they don't stop their eating. Like, they don't realize, like, I'm done. Like, for me, it's like I just am not as hungry when I'm not training as much. I'm very in tune with my hunger fullness. I try to be. And I just noticed, like, I'm not as hungry, I don't eat as much because my body just isn't as hungry, or needing the food, but I think sometimes for some maybe people just aren't in touch with hunger fullness signals, and I have worked with people that are like, "Yeah, I just stopped training, and then I was still eating like I was training," and I'm like, "How'd you eat that much when you were training?" I don't understand, but it's like, "Okay, yeah, we can't do that." You have to when you're not training when you go from 20 hours of training to maybe, like, 8 or 10, which is still a lot, but it's like you're doing half the amount because it's now the off season. You have to realize you don't need as much. And, you have to kind of adjust accordingly. Otherwise, what happens is it's not 5 pounds, it's 25 pounds. Maybe it's 15. And there's a lot harder to lose that when you're then going in. And then I feel like then people kind of go through this like almost overeating, undereating, yo yo up and down throughout the year, and that isn't that great for us, and it's harder to stay lean, and muscle and things like that when we're sort of up and down, and, body fat composition can be negatively affected. I think it's just, like, keeping that in mind, maybe weighing yourself once a week if you can if you're okay with the scale and it doesn't cause a lot of triggers for you, just to kinda make sure you're not jumping up too much, but don't get obsessive about it and weigh every day over the holiday. Don't wait Christmas morning, please.
Do we want to talk about a little bit of the training side? If if I'm working with an athlete and the holidays are coming up, generally I don't treat them any different. I make sure that I reach out to every single one of my athletes before the holiday comes up, and I have to ask them. I was like, "What are your plans for these holidays? Are you traveling? What are some of the needs that you have? Are you going multiple families, like we said? So your time is, a lot of time is spent in the car or whatever, or driving here and there." And then I say, "What is it that you want to do?" Because now is a great time to kind of go that route. Unless you're actively training for something like I am, it's a little bit more freedom,
Mhm.
during this time. And I think it's a great time to really kind of say, which I will admit, it's hard for me to do, to give a little grace to yourself, where you don't get a workout in because let's say that you have to be at Thanksgiving dinner at 2 o'clock, and you had to make a dish, and so you waited until the morning of Thanksgiving to make whatever dish that you were going to make, and now you don't have time to do a workout.
Yeah.
That I will admit that that's hard for me. That is
Mhm.
that is one thing that's really, really hard for me because I view it as like I failed to plan. So it's a failure on my part that I didn't get a workout in.
Right, especially if you're driving somewhere, like, if you making the dish and then you have a ways to
Yeah.
drive and you just don't and it's hard if you're working full time, you're not taking the day off before to, like, maybe have that time to make something. Like, I don't think it's helpful to be hard on yourself. You just might not be able to make that turkey trot, and that's okay. I mean, if you could do even just 30 minutes of something, I argue that would be better, or even, like, if you can go for a walk after, like, that's still movement, so don't just because it's not a workout and a planned, strategic thing that's on your training peak schedule. It's like it's gonna be
Yeah.
okay if that's what you do because 'cause you're still doing something. But yeah, I mean, even, like, putting that in your training plan as a planned day off and not putting something in there expecting you to, because then you're really gonna feel bad. I know for Christmas, like, we're gonna be up in Steamboat, and it's usually not pleasant that time of year to go on a run, it's, like, icy, and I've had some terrible falls on the ice, like, pretty scary falls on the ice, so I am, like, terrified of the ice. And, there's no treadmill. I mean, I'm not gonna go seek out a treadmill on Christmas. So I'm not I'm just gonna plan nothing in my schedule for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. That week is, in fact, gonna be one of my lightest weeks of the whole year. It'll probably be, like, 20 miles total of running because 'cause I'm just gonna allow myself to, like, have, that week really easy. But on the other days I can run a little more, that's fine, but I'm not gonna pressure myself. So that's just planned into I've already got that thought out, planned into my schedule that I'm not even gonna try to run. I might walk, I might, if they're doing something, usually, we'll go for a walk or something, but I'm definitely not gonna try too hard. And I think that's fine. Let's say you were actually gonna go somewhere snowy for the Christmas for, like, a week. That's a little more challenging because 'cause you're gonna be somewhere, like, some people take, like, a vacation or they go visit family. Sometimes maybe it's you're lucky and it's somewhere like Arizona. Sometimes it's not, right? Like, it's, like, somewhere where the weather is just maybe it is the Midwest and it's, like, really just there's not a lot of opportunity to go out and train. I think you just have to kind of plan that in and do the best that you can, and if there's alternatives like a gym or something you can do, that's great, but usually, if I have athletes in those situations, I'm kind of planning that as some downtime or, seeing what they have available to them and working around that, but I think when we sort of pressure to kind of keep up with a training plan, it's hard. I also think that's why it's hard to have races in January. Like there's Houston,
Yeah.
the Houston half and full, I think is January or February. I mean, that time of year is great because it's cooler, but it's really hard to train unless you can not be traveling very much. It's harder to train this time of year. And yeah, definitely if you're traveling, it makes it challenging.
It's common to have triathletes with their A-type personality, like, "Oh, I'm gonna bring my bike and I'm gonna pack my trainer," which I have done over a holiday trip to see, in-laws or whatever. I did that. It's a little interesting to have to tell them, I'm
Yeah,
gonna go down in the basement, I'm gonna do a workout, I'm gonna go get on my bike and get on the trainer. But, you know, at least be honest with yourself on what it is that you really have the ability to do.
right. Because then
It's
you'll
not
disappoint yourself if you take all that
yeah,
and then you're
it's
like, "I
it's
can't
not
really
a
do it."
time it's not a time to, like, overreach and say, "Hey, I think I could do this," and, I want you to really sit down and say, "What do I realistically have the ability to do?" If, I'm a triathlete and I may not have the ability to do a bike workout on some trip, then it might be a good time to do, like, a run block, where it's just like, you leave the bike at home and you just bring your run shoes because, I mean, it's a little bit easier to manage that kind of situation, and you just say, "I'm gonna run every day." And then
Right,
we have to, set up the sequencing of those workouts to manage that stress. If you're not used to running every day, then we have to figure out how to properly do that so that you're not coming home overstressed your body, and now we're like, it would have been better just to not have done anything because now we're behind the 8 ball and we're having
right.
to repair something that was damaged. So
True. But
just
even be
be
creative in that,
yeah,
like, I was thinking with the snowy situation, like, I remember one time when I was there, it's obviously mountainous, so they have this, like, groomed it's like house and hill, they have, like, a groomed trail that's for cross-country skiers, but I mean, I think most people hike on it, like, people are hiking on it, and it's in the backside of the mountain, and I just, like, ran up that, and it was snowy, and it was actually really hard to run because it was in the snow up the mountain, but it was, like, a great workout, and, I don't know, it was different, and I wouldn't overdo that kinda thing because obviously that different terrain and stuff, like, you can get injured if you're all of a sudden jumping in, like, snowy terrain and trying to run in that or something, but, I think if you can kinda think, "Okay, what at least it's safe," like, it was like, "If I fall, it won't be like falling too hard on the ice or something. So it was just like trying maybe even being like a little bit creative, just your expectation for what you're going to be able to accomplish there and the pace and things like that have to be adjusted for. But I'm thinking of even like alternatives like snowshoeing or get on a pair of cross country skis and try that out. Yeah, you don't want to overdo it, but like it might be a good opportunity to try a different type of activity that can kind of keep your cardiovascular shape. Or if you're going skiing over that time, like downhill skiing, I mean, it's not the same, but at least you're doing something. And so maybe your expectation isn't then to also do a whole load of other training on top of that. So yeah, that's my thoughts too. I think that's all I
Well,
have anyway for that.
I like that we brought up the idea of not using training or exercise as either punishment or reward. I think
Mhm.
that that's a really valuable thing to keep in mind because it's something that I've struggled with, over the years as well, where I say, I'm going to go out and I'm going to do this workout ahead of time so that I can eat what I want.
Right.
Like you said, that's a big red flag. And then in the same breath, you could say, well, I ate all this, so now I have to. That's another like red flag phrase. And so I like
Right.
that we mention this is like stop
And
using training as either as a gateway to do something that you wouldn't normally do, or as a way of punishing yourself for doing something that you did.
mhm.
Training is supposed to supplement what it is we
It's
do,
supposed to
and it
be yeah, it's
yeah.
supposed to be for enjoyment and not for yeah, I think that's hard too because there might be that tendency, like, I'm gonna go out and do something epic in the morning of Thanksgiving, and then that way I don't have to worry about it, and I get that. It just becomes a slippery slope when that mindset becomes more and more ingrained with people, and it's like then they are doing workouts as a means to eat certain things are they're using that workout and then to justify it, especially like loads of unhealthy food or something and their balance isn't that great with that. I think it does become more of a problem when you're like, I'm going to do this epic thing and then I'm not going to fuel my body at all for that, and then I'm going to so that I can have all of these calories ready for Thanksgiving, like, and that I think is where it becomes a little bit more dangerous. If you're doing your normal exercise and fueling normally and you're kind of like, oh well, that's nice, I did my exercise, so now I'm not going to worry about eating later.
There Yeah, there's another thing that I wanted to bring up that ties to both the eating side and the training side, and that's the anxiety that comes from this particular time of year. I know that there are many out there who, whether it be a seasonal kind of thing where, it's like I don't want to call it like seasonal depression, but as we start to get into the later part of the year, people tend to like their moods will change, and sometimes people have a challenging time dealing with that. So it leads to additional, anxieties or depression. Then being surrounded by people that maybe you don't spend a whole lot of time with, and there's, past experiences that trigger things. And so anxieties tend to kind of creep in, and maybe dealing with large groups of people is stressful for you, using the food as a coping mechanism or using the training as an outlet for that kind of anxiety.
Yeah.
I do want to caution. I think sometimes it can be, depending on how you do it, I think that the training can be like a healthy way of treating the anxiety, but again, it all depends on how you approach it. If you're just going out and just burying yourself because your anxiety levels are really high, then that may not be the healthiest way to kind of deal with the anxiety. But if you're going to say, look, I've got a stressful day that's coming up because I'm dealing with some family members that I may not particularly want to deal with. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to get a workout in just to kind of make me feel good about myself and kind of relieve some pre-stress. I'll call it pre-stress before you get into the situation. You're being proactive and you're just like, I'm just going to go do a normal workout. I'm not going to go and I'm not going to bury myself and just completely destroy. I'm just going to go and just do a normal workout to put me into a better frame of mind so that maybe I can handle that scenario, that situation better. I think I'm more likely to deal with it from the food side, because I'm a stress eater, and so I will find myself maybe overindulging because my anxiety levels are up or I'm stressed out. That tends to be my approach, and so some of these tips that we've shared during this is something that I'm definitely going to incorporate into the holidays that are coming up for me, and see if it kind of
Yeah.
works out. But again, this is kind of trial and error. And that's one of the things that I kind of was getting at is like, let's just kind of see if maybe a few of these tips, improve your holiday experience, or maybe you don't feel as stressed as you usually do, or you don't feel like, as full as you usually do. And you kind of feel more on the comfortable side rather than just feeling completely bloated and from all the salt that you've taken in, which is another thing that I thought was kind of interesting in alcohol. You know, all the weight gain, like let's say that you weigh yourself at the beginning of Thanksgiving, and then at the end, you were dumb enough to get back on the scale and look at the quote unquote damage that was done.
Right.
What are the chances that not all of that is true weight gain? I mean, it could be water retention from the additional salt that comes from the meals.
Like 1 pound is about 3,500 calories. So if you've gained like 5 pounds over the course of Thanksgiving, like the chances that you ate 5 times that many calories is pretty unlikely because that would be like a lot of food. I don't
Yeah.
think people could eat that much. So it's probably salt, like fluid retention, throughout. It's never great anyways to weigh yourself at the end of the day after eating
Yep.
all day because of that. So it's probably a lot of like, yeah, fluid retention, just other things kind of happening in the body, but usually it's something to do with the way fluid is either being retained or the gut, fiber in our gut. And yeah, I don't know. There's just like so much that can influence that. I just wouldn't even do that experiment because it can mess with you. You probably maybe, I mean, you could maybe gain a pound if you ate 3,500 extra calories in one day. But like I said, if you're really listening to your body and you're not letting Thanksgiving become a 5-day thing, then the next several days you'll probably work it out. Not like trying to, you're not trying to purge it. You're just like doing your normal thing and maybe like trying to make healthy choices. And you're probably going to work through it and it's not even going to make any difference whatsoever, So I think like, and our body is actually interesting how it works. Like putting a little bit of faith that our body can tell, like, to figure it out. Like, usually when we overeat, like, just naturally, we might be a little more active or more fidgety, or naturally, we just might eat a little less, like, less the next few days if you're actually paying attention to hunger. So, you know, don't over worry about it. It's probably as long as you're, yeah, not overdoing it, then you're just getting back to your routine, you're gonna be just fine, trust me. So if anything, like, just be like, "Katie told me that I'm gonna be fine, so I'm gonna, like, enjoy this day. I'm not gonna stress about it." And I think the most hopefully the most stressful part, and I know it was just, like, the family piece I know can be. So I don't know if I have a lot of great tips for that, but I do think you're right. Finding some healthy coping strategies that are not food related might be a good way to kind of deal with that. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to dive into the anxiety over
I think that
family.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely outside of our wheelhouse, but it's
Yeah.
something that I think is valuable in terms of an internal conversation with yourself. It's like, why am I eating the way that I am eating? Or why am I working out during the holidays like I am? It's like, do you have a race coming on? Yes or no? If the answer is no and you're still burying yourself, then you have to kind of ask yourself, why am I doing this? And this is definitely the pot calling the kettle black.
But if it's because you're so stressed out about the holidays that you're just taking it all out on your run and burying yourself, and that's I think the running should be a coping. Okay if it's a coping strategy or the training, but it shouldn't be like a punishment or a something that you use in an unhealthy way, I guess. And that's
Yeah.
sometimes hard to figure out. That can be a difficult thing to kind of a difficult thing to kind of parse out, I guess. But
Yeah.
yeah.
'Cause I've found myself using training as a way of coping with stress and anxiety, and
Well, I do too, but
it doesn't make the problem go away. But what I found, it does help to a certain extent, but if you're failing to just deal with the root
true.
cause,
Yeah, true.
then, it's not like things are going to change.
You have to also be actively dealing with but I use it
Yeah.
as a means of coping, and I also sometimes use it as a means of thinking through problems, so I'll sometimes use it that way. But yes, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's not gonna fix your problem. In fact, if you're overdoing it, it might make it worse. Just,
Yep.
So when you
Yeah.
think about like using it, and if it's now you're using it as a tool to run away from your problems and I'm just gonna go on a run because I don't want to deal with this. It's fine if you're planning to deal with it after you get back, but if you're literally doing it and you're not actually dealing with things, then I do think you're right. It's probably a problem. And that's almost like I feel like that's a whole deep dive, like a whole
It
like
is. Yeah.
its own like sort of topic because it's hard sometimes to almost define when, and I almost argue in some cases like when does it become an addiction versus like what is an addiction when it is training becoming an addiction, and how do you even define that? So yeah, but let's just stick to the holidays for now.
Yeah, I got to get on the bike because I ran the Richmond 8K today, so I'm going to get on the bike and spin the legs out and kind of get
Nice.
things to loosen up. But I just want to, so we'll do some housekeeping. Please consider go out to Facebook and check out the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast group. It's out there on Facebook, private group. Answer one question, we'll let you right on in. We're trying to build out a community where we can all learn and support each other, and it'll be a great avenue for Q&A sessions. Trying to get some, or if you think of a podcast episode that you would like, a particular topic that we haven't discussed, bring it up and just make a post in that group. If you would like to reach out to us by email, you can feel free to do so. It's the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast at gmail.com. We also have turned on a feature. So if you're listening to us through the Buzzsprout website, there is now a feature that is in there. It's called Send Us a Text. So it's a way to directly message us through text message rather than email. If you're not interested and you just use text messages a lot more, feel free to use that option as well. It is now available for all episodes, even in the library. So if you're interested in coaching and you have some goals in mind for 2026 and you'd like to have some help with those, or if you just want to try something different, or if you're just super busy and you would rather just turn over the creation of training plans and all the stress that comes with that and trying to sequence and get appropriate volume, and you want to turn it over to somebody else. Both Katie and I are actively taking on athletes onto our rosters. You can reach out if you want to check out Katie. She focuses on the dietetics and the run training. So you can reach out to her at fuel2run.com. If you're interested in multi-sport or single sport, swim, bike, run, hike, whatever, you can go to tabulaRasaRacing.com and you can reach out to me. Both of us have tons of content on our websites. We have blogs, we have videos, all kinds of stuff about our coaching philosophies. There's all kinds of content on our respective websites, so feel free to check those out. Oh, reviews. If you're enjoying the content that we're coming out with and enjoying the podcast, wherever you're listening, please leave us a review and leave a comment. They are greatly appreciated to help others like you find us. So again, thank you guys for listening. This has been episode 46 on training and eating through the holidays.
If
I'm
you're
your host.
listening before Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving.
Yes, happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Enjoy the turkey, and then have a scoop of mashed potatoes and macaroni and cheese.
Enjoy. Yeah.
All right,
Enjoy
we'll talk to you guys next week, and thank you for listening to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. I'm your host, Coach Justin, along with Coach Katie. Happy holidays, everyone. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Listening to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. Feel free to leave us up to a 5-star review on iTunes and Spotify, because leaving a review really helps others like you find us. Visit the podcast website for other episodes of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast at enduranceathletejourney.buzzsprout.com. Have questions or comments about the podcast? Send Coach Justin and Katie an email at theenduranceathletejourney@gmail.com. For all things coaching, visit Coach Katie at fuel2run.com and Coach Justin at tabulaRasaRacing.com. Again, thank you for listening to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast, and remember to find joy in the journey.